This is the City of London, one of the most desirable locations to live in the entire world. The average house price exceeds $1.5 million, with a 3-bedroom detached house often exceeding $4 million. Yet, despite its popularity, 1 in 4 homes stands empty. This is largely because these properties have become a kind of currency, not intended to be lived in, but to be used for speculation, investment, and oftentimes money laundering. This kind of land speculation is a major driver of unaffordable house prices in much of the Western world and beyond. Amidst this backdrop of soaring housing costs, the political landscape of London, and indeed the broader Western world, is marked by increasing polarization. This discord is particularly acute when addressing the housing crisis, an issue that resonates deeply with the younger generation, who find themselves disproportionately affected by the inaccessible property market. However, amidst this maelstrom of political division and social unrest, there emerges a beacon of potential reconciliation. The old, somewhat forgotten ideology of Georgism has its roots firmly planted in history, yet it offers intriguing solutions to contemporary problems. It's a philosophy that finds supporters across the traditional political divide, attracting interest from both left and right-wing proponents. Join us as we navigate the intricate and fascinating landscape of Georgism, a philosophy that might just hold the answers to issues of land ownership, the housing crisis, and economic inequality. To fully appreciate Georgism, one must understand its founder and the era that shaped his thoughts. Henry George was born in 1839 in Philadelphia, into a world on the cusp of dramatic transformation. His early life was marked by financial hardship, leading him to leave school at the age of 14 and embark on a seafaring life. After his voyages, George settled in California, working as a typesetter and later as a journalist. His journalistic work, especially as an editor for various newspapers, provided him a platform to express his growing concerns about social and economic issues. The pivotal moment came when George was struck by the paradox of seeing poverty and misery in San Francisco, despite the abundance of land and resources. The late 19th century, particularly in America, was a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization. This era, known as the Gilded Age, saw unprecedented economic growth, but it was accompanied by extreme wealth disparities. The economy was characterized by the rise of monopolies, land speculation, and a banking system that often precipitated financial crises. Cities like New York and San Francisco were expanding rapidly, with new wealth from industrialization juxtaposed against squalid living conditions for the working class. Labor unrest, strikes, and social upheaval were common as the working population grappled with low wages, long hours, and poor working conditions. George's seminal work, Progress and Poverty, aimed to solve the great paradox of increasing wealth alongside increasing poverty. He observed that despite significant technological advancements and increased productivity, poverty and inequality were worsening. He argued that this paradox was largely due to the private ownership and monopolization of land. George posited that many commodities were fixed in supply and uniquely capable of generating economic rent due to its inherent value. This includes natural resources and a whole host of other commodities we will explore later on in this video. But George's primary focus was on the value of land as a finite resource. He argued that the unearned income generated by owning land was the root cause of economic inequality. His solution was the land value tax, a proposal to tax the unimproved value of land. Unlike traditional property taxes that levy buildings and improvements, land value tax is solely focused on the unimproved value of land. This means the tax is based on the intrinsic value of a plot of land, excluding the value of buildings, personal property, and other improvements. The rationale behind land value tax is grounded in the belief that land, unlike other forms of property, is a finite resource that no individual has created. Since the value of land is largely derived from community activities and public investments like infrastructure, schools, and public services, George argued that the economic rent from land should belong to the community. How land value tax works is relatively straightforward. A valuation of land in its unimproved state is conducted, and a tax is levied based on this valuation. By taxing only the land value tax discourages land speculation and hoarding, as holding on to undeveloped or underdeveloped land becomes less profitable. So if George believed that land was a communal resource, does that make him a socialist of some kind? Well, not quite. George still believed that capitalism should continue. In fact, more right-wing proponents of Georgism believe it would create a more efficient kind of capitalism. George proposed that this tax on unearned income would replace all other forms of tax, from property taxes to taxes on wealth. Georgists argue that most taxes, especially those on labor and capital, like income tax and sales tax, are what's known in economic discourse as distortionary because they discourage productive economic activities. For example, high income taxes can deter people from working more hours or taking on additional jobs, while taxes on capital gains or property improvements might dissuade investment in real estate development or business expansion. These taxes create a deadweight loss by preventing economic transactions that would have occurred in a tax-free world. In contrast, a land value tax, as advocated by Georgism, is seen as a non-distortionary, or at the very least, a less distortionary tax. Since the supply of land is fixed, taxing its value doesn't reduce its quantity or distort its allocation. In other words, a land value tax doesn't discourage production because it's levied on a resource that cannot be hidden or removed. Since the tax is based on land value, irrespective of how it's used, it creates a powerful incentive for landowners to utilize their land in the most productive way possible. This prevents wasteful practices like land speculation and holding prime land idle for future gains. Moreover, by shifting the tax burden from labor and capital onto land, Georgism aims to stimulate economic activity. It reduces the tax burden on productive activities like work and investment, potentially leading to increased employment, higher wages, and greater economic output. This shift in tax structure aligns with George's vision of an economy that encourages productive work and investment without penalizing success. Moreover, Georgism addresses inequality not just through taxation, but also by opening up opportunities. Particularly in many urban areas, land values are artificially high due to speculation. By making land more accessible and affordable, as speculative landholding becomes unprofitable under land value tax, more people can get on the property ladder, whilst starting a brick-and-mortar business would be cheaper, leading to broader economic participation and job creation. Furthermore, the billions of dollars that currently finds its way into the lucrative land speculation market would have to go elsewhere. In the absence of attractive returns from land speculation, sectors such as the stock market, bonds, or venture capital for startups could become more appealing. These areas are traditionally associated with productive investment, contributing more directly to economic growth and innovation compared to land speculation. George's philosophy was deeply rooted in the belief that the wealth generated from land should be shared by society as a whole, not monopolized by a few. However, it is worth noting that Georgists have differing opinions on how government funds should be spent. Many believe that policies such as universal healthcare and other policies aligned with more socialist economic models would be preferable. However, others have a more libertarian outlook, believing that socialist policies like universal healthcare should be scrapped in favor of competing healthcare providers, which could theoretically drive down prices. The money saved by privatizing these industries could then be given out in the form of a universal basic income, allowing citizens to choose the specific kind of services that suits them, whilst reducing government bureaucracy. Georgism has had a varied impact on history and policy, garnering both adoption and criticism. Henry George's ideas, particularly the land value tax, gained substantial traction in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Several regions attempted to implement a land value tax in various forms. For example, the city of Pittsburgh adopted a split-rate property tax system in the early 20th century, taxing land at a higher rate than buildings. Internationally, George's ideas also found some footing. In Denmark, the Justice Party, influenced by Georgism, implemented taxes based on land values in the early 20th century. Taiwan and Hong Kong have systems of land taxation that reflect Georgist principles, with the latter often cited as a successful example of high land value taxation alongside economic prosperity. However, in most countries, a separate land value tax is non-existent. Indeed, despite its popularity in the 19th century, Georgism is largely unknown, even within the United States. The complexities and challenges of implementing a land value tax on a large scale, combined with the difficulty in separating land value from improvements, made it less appealing compared to other forms of taxation. As economies evolved and became more diversified, the idea of funding government expenditure primarily through a single tax on land value seemed increasingly impractical. Lastly, the political landscape played a significant role in Georgism's decline. The entrenched interests of landowners and the real estate sector, who stood to lose the most from land value tax, meant that there was significant opposition to Georgism's implementation. This resistance, coupled with the rise of other economic ideologies that offered alternative solutions to economic problems, contributed to Georgism's waning influence. But some of these criticisms of Georgism are valid and must be addressed. Perhaps the largest risk associated with this ideology is the challenge of actually implementing a land value tax effectively. Determining the true market value of land can be complex and contentious. Land value is influenced by a myriad of factors, including its location, size, topography, the local economic environment, zoning regulations, and the potential for future development. Two similar parcels of land can have vastly different values based on subjective criteria like scenic views or neighborhood reputation. Moreover, land values can fluctuate significantly over time due to changes in the economy, local development projects, infrastructure improvements, or changes in zoning laws. Thus, accurately assessing the value of all land within a jurisdiction would require a substantial administrative effort. It involves conducting regular, comprehensive appraisals to reflect current market conditions. This would inevitably open up disputes with disgruntled landowners, creating further burdens for the state, whilst undermining their authority if too many incorrect valuations were made. Given the high stakes involved, there's also a risk of corruption and manipulation in the assessment process, which could undermine the effectiveness and fairness of the land value tax. Thus, the mechanisms and criteria by which the state valued land and levied taxes would have to be exceedingly transparent. Although a land value tax is considered to be non-distortionary in an economic sense, it may cause societal distortions which are not beneficial. Since the land value tax is based on the unimproved value of the land, there's a concern that landowners might be driven to overdevelop or misdevelop land to cover their tax liabilities and generate quick returns. This could lead to choices that aren't necessarily in line with the best interests of the community. Landowners in high-value areas might opt to convert green spaces, historical sites, or low-density residential areas into more lucrative commercial developments to maximize land value and thus their income to offset the tax. This could conflict with broader urban planning goals aimed at preserving cultural heritage, ensuring adequate green spaces, or maintaining community character. In rural areas, the land value tax might put pressure on farmers to convert agricultural land into more profitable uses, such as industrial or residential development. This could undermine agricultural sustainability and food security, especially if the land is more valuable for non-agricultural purposes. There is also a risk that Georgism could encourage real estate bubbles that inevitably pop. In periods of economic growth, real estate markets often experience rising land values. Under a Georgist system where land value is taxed, landowners might be incentivized to develop their land rapidly to generate sufficient income to cover the land value tax and to capitalize on high land values. This rush to develop could lead to overdevelopment, where more properties are built, than the market can absorb. Overdevelopment can result in a surplus of certain types of properties, like luxury residential or commercial spaces, potentially leading to a real estate bubble. In economic downturns, land values typically decrease, and the income generated from properties might decline. However, the land value tax would still be levied based on the land value, which may not decrease proportionally to the drop in income. This mismatch could put financial pressure on landowners, particularly those who are highly leveraged or have less diversified income streams. As a result, landowners might be forced to sell their properties at lower prices, potentially flooding the market with properties and driving prices down further. There is also the issue of transitioning to such a society. Since the tax is based on the value of the land itself, there might be an initial downward adjustment in land prices as the market reacts to the new tax burden. Homeowners, a significant portion of the population accustomed to traditional property taxes, might oppose a system that increases their tax burden and reduces the value of their assets. Ensuring widespread public support, or at least a comprehensive understanding of the changes and their long-term benefits, would be crucial. But this would be very challenging considering the number of people who have spent their whole lives paying for a mortgage, anticipating that they could use their home as a source of retirement income through rent or other means, such as a reverse mortgage. And although such a system may benefit many younger people wishing to get onto the property ladder, some may experience negative impacts. This would be especially acute for those who had recently garnered a mortgage before a land value tax was implemented. Not only would they be paying off a substantial mortgage on a property that has likely been devalued, they would also have the additional burden of the land value tax. Furthermore, Georgism and its reliance on a single tax may be unequipped to deal with the modern world. Modern governments face a wide range of financial obligations, including healthcare, education, social services, infrastructure development, defense, and environmental protection. The costs associated with these responsibilities have been growing, and there is skepticism that a single tax on land value could generate sufficient revenue to cover these expanding needs. Economists often advocate for a diversified tax base to ensure a stable and reliable flow of government revenue. Relying on a single tax source could make government revenues more vulnerable to fluctuations in that particular market, in this case, the real estate market. The question of whether a land value tax could fund a modern government has skeptics not only among opponents of Georgism, but also within the Georgist community. Regrettably, there seems to be a lack of comprehensive, costed studies on Georgism, highlighting its current obscurity and diminishing presence. To gain a basic understanding, let's consider the United Kingdom as an example for a rough estimation. The UK government currently generates approximately £1 trillion in revenue. In comparison, the total net worth of the UK is about £11.8 trillion, of which land value comprises roughly 60%. The rest is attributed to produced assets, such as machinery, equipment, and buildings, which would be exempt in a Georgist framework. To finance the government, a yearly tax of about 15 to 20% on the UK's £7 trillion land value might be necessary. However, this estimation does not account for potential decreases in land value, which could result from the implementation of Georgist taxation. Such a decline in land value could necessitate even higher taxes following Georgist principles or compel a reduction in government size and scope. However, although 19th century Georgism, with its heavy focus on land value tax, may be outdated, this does not mean that the fundamental idea of taxing economic rents is entirely redundant. Although a land value tax was the primary focus of Henry George's work, George and his successors also advocated for the taxation of other unearned economic rents, claiming that such resources should be held in common, much like land. This logic can be applied to a wide range of economic activities. For example, George believed that, like land, naturally occurring resources should also be subject to government taxation. Georgists advocate for the taxation of the extraction and use of natural resources like minerals, oil, and gas. The rationale is that these resources are part of the natural endowment of the earth, and thus their value should benefit the public. This rationale can be expanded upon to also include fish, forests, and even the usage of specific frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. Some have even proposed the taxation of satellite orbits, again arguing that space is a resource that should be held in common. Notably, Georgists propose a tax on natural monopolies. For example, airports, train lines, and seaports often operate in conditions of natural monopoly due to their location and infrastructure. Taxing the economic rent from these facilities could help in managing congestion and funding transportation infrastructure, whilst mitigating the impact of monopolistic price gouging. Taxing negative externalities, such as pollution or carbon emissions, also aligns with Georgist principles. This approach not only addresses environmental impacts, but also treats the environment as a communal resource that should not be freely exploited by individuals or corporations. The core idea behind taxing pollution or carbon emissions is the polluter pays principle. It holds that those who produce pollution should bear the costs of managing it to prevent damage to human health or the environment. In Georgist terms, this means treating the capacity of the environment to absorb waste as a communal resource that has value, and thus its use or overuse should be subject to a charge. While not traditionally considered in Georgist thought, modern interpretations could extend to taxing the economic rents derived from intellectual property rights, particularly if these IPs create a monopolistic market environment. Since these rights create a legal monopoly for many decades, a tax could help mitigate the negative effects of these monopolies and encourage the dissemination of knowledge and innovation. This line of thinking has been extended by some into the digital realm. Some argue that in the digital age, data itself can be a source of economic rent, particularly when large companies accumulate and monetize vast amounts of data. Although this data is collected by these companies, some modern Georgists argue that the information collected is a natural resource like land or mineral wealth, and therefore should be subjected to a kind of taxation. Similarly, one could argue that the economic benefits derived from automated entities like AI are akin to the unearned income from land. Like social media and search engine companies, AI like ChatGPT and Midjourney rely on vast amounts of data to create value through which they derive their profits. Thus, some Georgists argue that AI should be taxed, as it was created using the general public's data. Many believe that AI could lead to the widespread automation of jobs. Like pollution, this could be seen as a negative externality, which negatively impacts third parties. This gives further credence to the Georgist imperative that it should be subject to a kind of AI tax. Georgist taxation of algorithms and artificial intelligence also extends to the financial sector, particularly high-frequency trading algorithms. These algorithms can make trades in fractions of a second, magnitudes of times faster than any human could. Georgists argue that the profiting off of the quick movement of money using algorithms does not add value to the economy, making it a form of unearned income. Furthermore, they argue that these kinds of speculative trades can lead to market volatility and asset bubbles. Thus, financial derivatives, high-frequency trading, and other financial products could be seen as a kind of negative externality similar to pollution, as it can sometimes lead to the kind of financial meltdown we experienced during the 2008 financial crash. A financial transaction tax typically involves a small levy on the trade of financial instruments, such as stocks, bonds, derivatives, and other securities. The tax rate is usually set low to minimize the impact on long-term investors, but high enough to deter high-frequency trading and other forms of speculative behavior that can destabilize markets. In essence, while the fundamental tenets of 19th-century Georgism may seem outdated in some respects, their core idea, taxing unearned economic rents, remains highly pertinent. This principle can be adapted to various modern contexts, ranging from natural resources to digital data, showcasing its enduring relevance and adaptability in addressing contemporary economic and environmental challenges. Whether or not such a system taxing a plethora of unearned economic rents could fund a modern government remains to be seen, and Georgists must cost their idea significantly if they wish to be taken seriously in the present era. But what do you think of Georgism? Is it a wacky idea destined for failure and social collapse? Or is it the savior of capitalism? Let me know your thoughts down below, and thank you for watching.